Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's live discussion on Discovery Season 2, the first half of Season 2. So this is our mid-season discussion. I'm joined here by a special guest with a variety of opinions, which should be great, to talk about Season 2 of Discovery. So first joining me, as always, is my brother Akton Tamko, who does his own channel with his own Discovery review. So thank you so much for joining me to talk about Discovery.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's good to be here. Looking forward to this discussion. I think that of the three of us, I'm probably the most positive. So hopefully you guys will be nice to me. Well, not that I think Discovery's all rainbows and sunshine either, but I think out of the three of us, I'm probably the most positive on the show. So we'll see. Hope it should be an interesting discussion.
Cool. Yeah, and joining us, a very special guest, I think joined me once before for a Deep Space Nine discussion, Wes from the Pensky File has his own podcast there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about Discovery with some fresh blood. Me and my co-host Clay have been complaining. Some would use a cruder word to say what we're talking about Discovery, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I always tried to we ended season 1 talking to Trexpertise, Kyle from Trexpertise on our channel, and he's obviously more positive about the show than we are, and I think it ends up in an interesting place when you kind of compare what everyone is looking for out of this series.
Absolutely. Cool. So let's just start with our overall feelings of season 2 so far. And I'll start with my feelings of season 2 for the first. We're at the mid-season here because the 7 episodes in, we got 7 more to go. And my feelings on that, I think it's definitely a noticeable improvement from season 1, in my opinion. I think they have fixed the tone which is something that a lot of people had an issue with season 1, with the tone being too dark, but they fixed it in such a way I felt was natural for the show. It didn't seem jarring or out of place. The characters still seemed consistent with each other, and the main thing they did by introducing Pike into it, who I think, even though he doesn't match up with what we know of as Pike, is still a really good character played by a good actor, and I think it inserts a lot of fresh blood into the show. And I thought it had a really good start with a really good first 2 episodes, but then it's been a bit shaky. I would still say I'm overall positive on the show, but it does seem like sometimes they try to shove too much plot into each episode, and they're doing this long-term story arc, which I think I'll have to see the rest of the season before I make my final judgment. But so far, I'm into it. I think it maybe could have been better, but for me, it reminds me a lot of season 3 of Enterprise, which I really loved, because that had an overarching arc, but each episode they went off on a different adventure that was maybe somewhat connected to the arc, maybe not. And that's kind of what they're doing here. And I do like that format, although sometimes I think they could have do a better job with it, but so far I'm with it. But anyway, Wes, if you want to go next, your feelings of season 2 so far.
Sure. Season 2 is an improvement over season 1, which was kind of an abomination of a season of television. Season 2, they've kind of modulated. I think you could say that they've bent a little bit too far towards fan service type aspects of it, but they have improved the sort of pacing of the story. They've improved how they want to compare this sort of episodic nature of the show with the serialized story, which is the Red Angel that they're doing. It still suffers from tremendously bad writing in a lot of cases. Outside of that, it is, it's growing pains. It's trying to figure out where it wants to be as a show. I don't think it's making the strides that it kind of needs to as a modern television show. And I think that the writing is probably the biggest thing holding it back. But it's an improvement over season 1. It's still not a particularly good TV show, I don't think, but it's making strides in the right direction.
Cool. So, Apkin, your thoughts on
Yeah, well, as you said, it's the first half of the season, so I really am viewing it as set up for the second half of the season. We expected there to be some bumps in the road because of the sudden change in showrunners. The previous showrunners were fired. Alex Kurtzman has now taken over control. And I pointed out in my reviews where I think that has affected the show negatively. And I expected bumps in the road. I also was not thrilled about this fan servicey aspect of bringing Spock in, bringing Pike in. So I'm looking at it as, let's get this out of their system now so they could go ahead and, that's why I don't mind them doing Talos 4. Like, just go all in. Just, if you want to throw in a young Kirk, go ahead. Just get it out of your system. Whatever. And I expect the second half of the season to be even better. If the second half of the season sucks, then I will look back at the first half and say that it also sucked retroactively. But if the second half of the season really pulls it off, which I think it can, I think it's possible that it could end up really pulling out a good story. I agree with you about the Enterprise Season 3 kind of overall story arc. I think if they are able to pull that off, then I can look back at the first half of season 2 and be like, it was a really good setup. It was improvement on pace over season 1. But again, if they blow it at the end of season 2, then I can probably think the whole season sucked. But right now, I'm positive of where they are heading. I'm feeling good about where they're heading. I like a lot of season 2 so far. I do think there have been bumps in the road. I do think there are problems, but I'm pretty positive of where they're headed. So we'll see what happens in the second half.
Now, I think I remember hearing somewhere that the showrunners, I can't remember their names, but the duo who got fired because apparently they were cruel to the writing staff. But I heard that they did up to episode 6, and then Alex Kurtzman took over for episode 7. Does that sound right? Because I think that's what I heard.
Yep, Kurtzman and Paradise did the last episode that we just watched, which is Lights and Shadows.
Okay, so the first 6 episodes were still the previous showrunners.
Harberts and Berg did the first 6. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've actually recently I heard the opinion that someone felt that the end of the season, the rest of the second half of the season is going to suck because Alex Kurtzman did it, and so this person in particular doesn't like Alex Kurtzman.
Kurtzman is executive producer in name only. I think he's not involved in show running to the extent that the other people are, because he's more of the George Lucas-y sort of taking the whole universe in control. He's running the entire Star Trek Enterprise, so he's not really paying attention to Discovery, is my understanding of it. That's why they have this woman, Miss Paradise, whatever her first name is, who's become the sort of showrunner of the second half of the second season.
Oh, okay.
She's named she's going to be the showrunner in the third season. So,
yeah, I thought she was the third season showrunner. I didn't know
she's there. She's there now. She's now working on the show. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So she was also involved in the second.
So she was involved in the episodes that we're going to watch now?
Yes, her first episode, I think, was this last one, The Light and Shadow. So she's the showrunner of the second season at this point going forward, and she'll be the showrunner of the third season.
So Alex Kurtzman is more like a Kevin Feige figure then.
Yeah, he's involved he's the Berman character who's involved in everything. Yeah.
Well, that's actually not very. If comparing him to Berman doesn't make me feel well, because Berman kind of ruined the last 3 seasons of Voyager and the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, in my opinion. But anyway, I don't know. I'm a bit more optimistic. I think, because I don't think, as you're right, Wes, especially judging by the show, I don't think Kurtzman would really just take over and throw his weight around and do everything. I think he'd more delegate it to the people who are already working.
Well, did you think that Light and Shadows felt any different from the previous episodes? I would say no. It felt exactly the same to me.
I don't know. I'm not so sure. I think it felt similar, but I'm not sure if I would say it's exactly the same. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it felt the same to me, but we'll see as we go on to the next episodes if there's, after we see a few of them, if we see and notice a sharp difference. But to me, I felt that it was the same.
Yeah. So sorry, just reading the chat. Quack Addict saying, I would like to see Ash Tyler and the Klingons just disappear and to the timey-wimey never come back. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I haven't been that happy with what they've been doing with them, but I think I'd rather that they improve upon them than to just blank them off the show. Ash Tyler, like I think Ash Tyler, there's a lot of potential there. I just don't think this past couple episodes. I think they've been squandering the potential and just been sort of ruining his character, because I talked about this a lot in my reviews. He kind of comes off as like he's like, oh, wants this and Section 31 wants that. I was like, dude, you've been in Section 131 for like 2 days. How are you their spokesman all of a sudden? And just he doesn't seem consistent with the Ash Tyler from season 1, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing we definitely agree on. I definitely don't like what they've done with Ash Tyler in season 2, and I feel like that it seemed to me at the end of season 1, it really felt like they were setting up this season-long arc with Ash Tyler and the Klingons, because he's half human, half Klingon, or not. You know what I mean? He's like he's both, and that he's going to be the bridge between the Klingons and the humans, and that's the story arc we're setting up for. And then all of a sudden, it's boom, one episode in season 3. Now episode 3. Now let's throw him into Section 31, where he doesn't belong at all. Like I don't understand why they offered him the job. I don't understand why he took it. Yeah, this character is a mess. So I agree with you, though. I would rather them fix it and hopefully get him back into the flow, maybe find a place for him to fit back in the crew again, going forward, rather than just wipe him off the show entirely. But I definitely do not like where this character is at right now.
I have I guess I have a question to sort of figure out where we stand right now. If you wanted to go through and say quickly, what do you think is the best part of the show? Like any sort of item. What do you think? What keeps you tuning in week after week to watch this TV show?
Mark, do you want to go first? Or do you want?
Yeah, that's a tough. Or do you have? If you know something, you can go first, because that's a tough question.
Well, I like a lot of the characters. I like Pike, even though I kind of almost wish they would have just called him something else, because he's not the same Pike. And then if they called him something else, he could continue being on this show. But I like his dynamic with the crew. I like a lot of characters. I like Saru, even though they totally changed his backstory. I like the development of that character. I like the character development. And I am interested in this Red Angel story as far as where it's headed. I'm intrigued. They've got me interested in it. I want to see where it ends up. It could end up in a bad place, and then I will look back and say this was a waste of my time. But right now, I'm intrigued by this concept of this angel, quote unquote, that comes in and takes them to, I likened it in one of my reviews to like whatever force it is that drives Sam Beckett to leap him from life to life, to put things right that once went wrong. It's like that almost seems like there's some kind of mysterious benevolent force, and I don't know what it is, so I'm interested in it. So I think those are the two things that has me watching every week right now. Is I like the character development for the most part. Ash Tyler is an exception. And I'm intrigued by this plot, so I want to see where they're headed with it. If it ends up being horrible, then at the end of the season, I'll feel like I wasted my time. But they have me captivated. They have me interested in what is this? Where are we going? What is this going to turn into?
Yeah, and for me, I would say I think throughout both seasons 1 and 2, what attracted me the most and what I think the show handles the most is the character stories and the character interactions. Whenever we get like really into deep into the characters and focusing on them and their interactions and how they feel about each other, I think the show falters when it deals a lot, especially in season 1, when it deals a lot with the plot and like trying to be too plot heavy and trying to be too suspenseful or whatever. That being said, like I think season 2 was an improvement on that part as well, because I think it handled like suspenseful elements a bit better. I think some episodes I think they were still handled it quite poorly, and I think I like the overall, like I'm with Atkin, I like the overall storyline with the Red Angel. I'm curious to see where it goes, but I don't think that they hooked me as much as they could have. So I'm probably in it more for the characters like Pike. I like Burnham. I know a lot of people don't, and I really like the actress. Burnham, Tilly, Stamets, Saru. I guess Saru I'm kind of warming up to. He pissed me off in season 1, but I'm starting to warm up to him now. Yeah, so mainly the character interactions and hopefully the hope that it's going to improve because it is showing serious signs of improvement in the first couple episodes of season 2.
I think I'm kind of in an interesting place with it because I think honestly the only reason that we continue to watch it is because it has the Star Trek brand associated with it. If this was a non-Star Trek show, I don't think that we would have continued to watch it if it was called something generic, some sci-fi generic show. I think that the thing that we're kind of stumbling on is that the difference we find in our audience about people who like the show and don't like the show is that the people who seem to really like it and defend it are very interested in what they think is going to happen next. So the people who tend to like to sort of think about like, where is this all going and what is this all going to amount to? And they seem to really enjoy the mystery aspect of it, which is that the seasons so far, both 1 and 2, have been built around this like mystery of trying to figure out what's going on. And I think that the show actually suffers because it's trying to service this mystery aspect. And I think that the reason I don't like it is because the show at this point doesn't have a very good grasp on what it takes to make a good episode of TV. And I don't like looking at this season as a single story because I think if you look at season 1, it was a terrible story that they told across the entire season. So waiting episode after episode to get to that bad point is not satisfying. Star Trek generally feels like it should be more digestible as an episodic thing. And I think the first 2 episodes of season 2 were very good at that as discovery, or at least they were okay at attempting to try to do it. The problem, and I wonder what you guys think, is that I don't think that this writing staff is very good at writing both character work and an overarching mystery story. Because in my opinion, the weakest part of both seasons has been this overarching angle that they're trying to get across. This one, it's the Red Angel and the Spock thing. I wish they would stop doing that so heavily and they would take more of like a Mad Men-y approach where you can watch an episode of Mad Men on its own and it stands alone. It's its own fine thing. It doesn't need to be continued on to the next thing. But I don't know what you guys think about the overall story, about whether or not you like the Red Angel or you like this sort of really heavy plot-driven serialization storytelling that the show does.
Well, I would say that, and I thought about this, and I'm pretty sure that I would still be watching this show even if it was some random sci-fi show, because I do watch. I actually liken this. I think to me this has a similar quality to some other sci-fi shows I watched, like Stargate SG-1, which wasn't particularly good in its first 2 seasons. And so I think I would watch the show even if it wasn't Star Trek. I probably wouldn't do reviews on it weekly and do podcasts on it if it wasn't Star Trek, but I'm pretty sure I'd still watch it. And I don't know, like I have sort of a different perspective because I actually like the fact, to me, I see the fact that it's sort of telling one story over a time period as a positive. That's something that brings me back to the show. Granted, I think season 1 handled that very poorly. In season 2, I think there's some issues, but I think still overall, I do think they're doing a good job with the mystery, as you say, of the Red Angel for the most part. Like I said, it's kind of half and half. Like they could do better, but it's definitely showing improvements. Definitely has me intrigued enough to keep watching and see where I actually want to see where they go with this. But it's very dependent, as Akton said earlier, on how they actually conclude it. I think there's the possibility that if they conclude it in an awesome way, this could be a great season. But if they kind of fizzle out on it, then it would really hurt the season overall.
But isn't that kind of a pointless risk for the show to take? Why do you write a story like this where all of your eggs are in this basket that you need to land the landing? Like, why do that to yourself? Make it more episodic. You can still have an overarching serialized story. But the problem with this mystery kind of storytelling is that if everyone either figures out the answer or the answer is really stupid by the end of the season, everyone goes, well, that was a waste of time. Why did I watch 15 episodes of a terrible mystery story? In my opinion, the mystery story really kind of hamstrings what they can do. And I wish they did more of the first 2 episodes storytelling, which kind of had their own little standalone mission things going on, where they'd go down to a planet and they'd look at something and they'd go off. They weren't great episodes, but at least they felt like they were standalone in a way that I think that the more recent episodes of the second season don't feel that way. It feels like they're racing to get to somewhere.
Well, I don't know. I feel like when you have any kind of serialized show, you are putting all your eggs on the mystery. Let's take Lost, for example. There are people who hated the ending in Lost and that retroactively ruined the whole entire show for them. I didn't feel that way about Lost. Definitely the final season, the entire final season was terrible because they didn't stick the landing. And any serialized show, another one that I was big into for the first 3 seasons was Fringe. And then at the end of the 3rd season, also Alex Kurtzman, I believe, was involved in that, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I felt they ruined that show at the end of season 3, and they never stuck the landing. They never finished what they had started. So there are a lot of shows that I feel like that put all their eggs on the basket of finishing up the mysteries and the solving the mystery and finishing up what you started with the serialized format. We've just never seen it in Star Trek really before. The closest thing.
Why does it have to be a mystery? Would be my question. You can have a serialized story that's not mysterious and isn't a trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah. Well, because I guess for me personally, I like those mystery serialized shows.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't have to be, but just for me personally, I am drawn to those type of shows. I was drawn to Lost, to The Leftovers, to Fringe. I like that. And I wanted Star Trek to do something different with this new show. I didn't want another episodic show. I think that was getting dry with Voyager. Certainly the first 2 seasons of Enterprise were horrible. Enterprise was the first one that really tried. As Mark mentioned, the 3rd season was, I don't know if you call it serialized, but it was definitely one overall story arc. I don't know if it was really a mystery per se, but it was one story arc, and that was probably the best season of Enterprise. I kind of wanted this new Star Trek show to do something different. I didn't want them to come back and let's just repeat the same thing we've been doing for 30 years, 40, 50 years, because I love going back and watching the old episodes of all those previous series. But for a new show, I don't want to see the same thing again. I want something new. I also expected that in trying to do something new, they're going to have some bumps in the road. It's not going to be, they're not going to land it in the beginning. So I do feel, I'm positive because I feel like season 2 is an improvement over season 1. And I would anticipate that season 3 should be better than season 2. Especially if you're going to have one showrunner for the entire season. So I don't know. I kind of I wanted them to do something different. They are. That's not. I didn't expect it to be perfect. I expected there to be bumps in the road. So it's kind of almost like where I expected it to be, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, I was thinking too that I was sort of wanting more of a modern take on Star Trek rather than meshing it with more modernized TV storytelling, rather than just seeing something that we've seen before. And as I said, I think it's been very bumpy. They haven't gotten it right yet, but I'm very optimistic because since they seem to be improving, that eventually they will. And I do think the behind-the-scenes drama does play a lot into that, which happened in season 1 and 2. And so if they sort of calm things down and get into a norm with season 3, then I think it could be really good. And that's pretty much exactly what happened with Next Generation. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama in the first 2 seasons, and by the 3rd season, they sort of settle things down and find their footing. And I think there's a very strong potential of that happening with Discovery as well.
I think that the something that I find sort of strange is that people compare Discovery to something like TNG and DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise even. I think it's too different of a show. I think that you in a modern era, you don't get 2 seasons to figure yourself out. Like TV shows in the modern era kind of need to know what they're doing right by the start. And the reason that TNG and Voyager and all those shows had the chance to do it was because they didn't have anything else on TV. Like you were allowed to just be horrible for 50 episodes before anyone figured anything out. You were still selling ads. You were still making money off of it. People were watching it because there wasn't anything else. This show is kind of remarkable in that it's probably the worst written modern show that I watch. Like it's fundamentally not very good in a way that's interesting to me. When I see a lot of other even middling shows that come out on Netflix or CBS or whatever, you're kind of like, well, this isn't bad. But I feel like writing and modern TV production has gotten to a point where it's kind of interesting when a show is bad, and it's not just because the idea is flawed. Like there are bad shows that have bad ideas about what the show should be, but a show that is written poorly is kind of interesting. And it feels like this show, the way that they write this show lends itself to these kinds of problems. And it's interesting that they like, why do you, the one thing I would say, I'm sorry I'm talking, but the one thing I would say is that why is this show written at such a breakneck pace? Or would you disagree that the pace of this show is kind of absurd for a television show?
I would disagree that this is the poorest written show in modern TV. Like
out of things I watch, obviously I don't watch every TV
fair
show.
Enough. Yeah, fair enough. But just for me personally, with the stuff like I've been watching, like every year I try to do like my top 10 favorite shows of the year. So I make a list every show I watch in order from what I like and not. And I think last year was like 32 shows, and Discovery ended up like number 19 for me. So it's kind of sorted down the list, but it wasn't at the absolute bottom. That's season 1 I'm talking about. Season 2 I think might even get higher. So I do think there are some shows that are kind of, a bit rough. Just my taste personally. And as far as the pacing goes, I totally agree with you about, as far as season 1 goes, that the pacing was horrendous, which is my biggest complaint, because there's a lot of other things about season 1, like specific moments and specific episodes that I liked, but I think if I look at the season as a whole, it kind of falls apart. And I think season 2 is doing a much better job of that, personally. I think there are definitely still issues. They haven't gotten it perfect, but there's definitely, as I said, I definitely see improvement in the pacing over the first season, but that's something, again, I'll have to look at overall once we get into the end, once I see the rest of the season.
And I wanted to address because I've heard the what you said before, the opinion that in the modern era, a show doesn't really have 2 or 3 seasons to prove itself as TNG and Voyager and DS9 did. And I've heard that a lot, and I agree. Unless the show has the word Star Trek in the name. I mean, Star Trek is a whole different thing than ever. You can't compare it to anything else. It is a part of the Star Trek franchise, and therefore it's going to have loyal fans who are going to watch it just because, as you said, you just watch it only because it has the name Star Trek in it. There's going to be people who stick with it. And then if the 3rd season ended up being, I'm not saying it's going to be, but let's just say hypothetically, the 3rd season ended up being the breakout season, same way that the 3rd season of Next Generation was. I mean, I watched every single episode in order recently over the last couple of years, and the difference between the 1st and 2nd season and the 3rd season is just tremendous. And if Discovery were to do that, I think that you would have people, just as what happened in Next Generation, where people were complaining about Next Generation, like, how dare they do this? This is an abysmal. This is blasphemy that they're doing this to our wonderful franchise, our wonderful show that we grew up with. I can't believe they're doing it. And then, and now, in retrospect, everybody thinks TNG is amazing. So I think Discovery has a chance. I'm not saying it's going to, but like 20 years from now, people can look back and go, oh, the 7 seasons of Discovery. Oh, it got really great in season 3. It was amazing seasons 3 through 7. And the reason why we allow that, because it has the name Star Trek. If this was just some generic sci-fi show, yeah, it would be like, well, you're canceled. You don't get any more seasons because we need something now. But I think, because it has the name Star Trek in it, I think that's why, or at least me personally, that's why I'm willing to cut it some slack and give it some time.
Yeah, and also I would add, I would compare it to The Expanse, which I thought, like, don't get me wrong, the 1st season was still good. It was better than the 1st season of Discovery, and probably even the 2nd, but it wasn't great. It still has some issues. But then we got into season 2. That's when it got great, and it's getting better with each season. Black Sails, a modern show, is also the same way, where the 1st season had a lot of pacing issues, but it got much better with season 2 and season 3. So I think it still can happen with modern shows. as well.
Well, the thing I would say about those shows, which I haven't seen The Expanse or anything, but I would argue that there's a difference between what modern TV shows do, which is they are functionally complete when they come out with a season. They just need some fine tuning to sort of figure it out. Like the writers aren't aware of how to write for the actors, or they're not aware of how they want to break their story beats down. Discovery is different because Discovery is almost like fundamentally broken on a writing level, where it just doesn't. There is no like foundation to what they want to do that's very satisfying. And I guess it would just go into sort of my problem with the whole show is that Discovery's writing is so we have the problem of it is no cards on a board. This show, it's like it's clearly obvious that they have sketched out where they want the season to go, and they have these beats that they must hit. They must hit them to get to this next episode. And I think, Mark, in your review, this one, the past episode we saw, the Sarek giving Burnham and Spock to Section 31 is a no card on a board thing. It's like there's no reason for this to happen. It has to happen because you've predetermined that you must get them to this point. You must meet Georgiou. The problem with the writing on this show is that it didn't learn from something like Breaking Bad, which is that you kind of need a little bit of improvisation in your writing room. And Breaking Bad kind of knew where it wanted to go, but they would still take the time to organically unfold things. Discovery doesn't do that. Discovery is very mechanical, and you can see all of the beats happening. And because the pace is so relentless, you notice that nothing really amounts to anything. So you watch the show and you feel very underwhelmed by everything that's going to happen. And I'll just, my final point about this is that one thing that Discovery does is it takes a sci-fi concept, which I always want a Star Trek show to do, like the universal translator in the one where they got the virus and the translator broke down, and this time travel thing that Pike and Tyler did in the last episode. It takes a sci-fi concept and it sticks it into the episode, and it doesn't do anything with them. And it's very interesting for a Star Trek show to not do that. It basically is like it had the Pike and Tyler time travel episode where they didn't use time travel at all. And it's like, well, why is this happening? And the whole thing just piles into me of feeling very unsatisfying when it's all said and done. You've got a whole bunch of ideas that feel Star Trek-y, but they don't coalesce and they don't come together into anything meaningful. And I think that the problem I have week to week is that I don't feel like it's going anywhere, and I don't feel like I'm emotionally invested in anything that's happening. And I don't know what you guys think about that. What do you think about how this show is constructing itself as a Star Trek show? Does it feel authentic to you, or does it feel like they're doing a poor imitation of this is what Star Trek used to do, so we kind of have to make it feel like that, even though we're going in this new direction? Where do you think that it works?
Well, I would say, in my opinion, yes and no. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes the stuff they do does really feel like Star Trek. Like this, a couple particular episodes this season, like episode 2 and I think episode 4, those felt like a classic TNG original series episode that felt like just at home. Other times, like with this past episode, I think it does feel like, oh, let's try, like they're trying hard to like wink, wink, and nod with the fans, and not actually telling a good story. So I think, as I said, I think it's growing pains, but I think they're improving. But I think it's a little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah, and I would mostly agree with that too. I think, I mean, as I said earlier, I kind of want them to move past all this, like as you say, Mark, the wink, wink, nod, nod, and oh look, we're going to Talos 4 now. Oh yeah, oh Pike and Spock. I mean, I've resigned to the fact that this is what they're doing in season 2, and I want them to get this out of their system and be able to move beyond that and be a show on their own, and not depend on previous Trek characters and storylines in order to be an authentic Trek show. Like they should be able to feel like an authentic Trek show without having to depend on these wink winks and nod nods of these previous characters and storylines. And I think you're right. I think, Mark, sometimes they have been able to do that, other times not. And I do see it as growing pains. I do hope that they can move beyond that and make it more consistent to where it feels like an authentic Trek show that stands on its own all of the time and not just some of the time.
So to feed off my point of, you guys mentioned you like the characters as the best point, what do you think is the worst part of this series so far? Like a worst, consistently worst thing that it does every single episode?
Do you want to go first, Afghan? I got to think about this.
No, I don't know what I don't know if there's anything that's consistently bad every episode for me. So I mean, I would have to think about it too. I can think about specific things that I feel the show has done wrong, but I don't know. I don't feel like there's anything that's specifically bad every episode, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, to me, it wouldn't be week to week. To me, it's very off and on. Like sometimes they really smash it, and other times they just totally fumble it. I mean, and it's obvious.
What's your favorite moment from the series then? Like, what moment do you think of when you think of this series? Does it have one? Is that a problem?
No, I would have no. I would have to say I'm just trying to think of something in season 2 beat this, because I was thinking of the season 1 moment, but I think maybe not. I think it's still the moment where they revealed that Ash Tyler was Vogue. And I liked that moment so much. I thought that was such a good, powerful moment. And I love the episode overall. It was directed by Jonathan Frakes, so I thought they did a great job. But I like that moment in particular, not because, it's the mystery, we resolved it, all our theories are correct. I didn't care about that. I like the moment because of the character interactions between Tyler and Burnham, and seeing Tyler. Like, I'm talking specific, actually more about the moment where he revealed this to Tyler, not the moment where he killed Kerber. Because to me, that I felt a very strong, identified with the characters. I felt they're tried. I thought it was good drama, good storytelling. But not that I was saying I was happy with the whole Ash Tyler Vogue story overall throughout the season, but I was happy with that moment. And to me, that was a very strong moment in television that I did point out as one of my favorite moments of any show that year.
I mean, I guess I think the show, like, there's not a single episode of this show that goes by where I don't at the end of it go, why did they make that choice? You know what I mean? Like, why did they do that? That's a very odd thing that they would do that. This kind of ties into my whole no cards on a board thing, but there are so many, not an episode of this show has gone by where I don't at the end of it go, I don't really understand why they made that leap of logic, or why this character did something like this, or why they ended up there, or why they included this storyline. And I think that's a problem. It's a problem just because of the sheer amount of churn that the show has. Like, it has all of these ideas and it doesn't settle on anything. The Universal Translator thing, when we were watching the Universal Translator goes haywire thing, we're like, what a great idea. What a great Star Trek idea that the Universal Translator is going to break down and no one can understand each other. And in the episode, they're like, Saru speaks all the languages. He'll be able to fix everything. And you go, Saru will be the hero of this episode because he's going to spend the entire episode fixing these problems. He fixes the problem in about 20 seconds in the episode, and they move on to another problem. It's extremely unsatisfying, and you end up always walking away, or at least I do, wondering why they included that. It feels like they're really just kind of throwing ideas out there to get them to fill the time that the episode needs. And I find it extremely lackluster. Like, they should have built an episode around the translator bit. You can build an entire 40 minutes around that idea. You can build an entire 40 minutes around this Pike and Tyler in a temporal loop thing where they're seeing the future and they're not really sure what it is, and it's kind of Minority Report-esque that they can't tell what's going to happen, and they don't do any of that. And you end up with, in my opinion, just poor character work filling the rest of the space. And I think that that's the consistent problem that the show has, is that I never walk away from an episode feeling that was a tightly written 40 minutes that totally made sense on every level. Like, everything was consistent, everything was functionally written, well written, and it worked for me. And that hasn't happened yet, which is kind of shocking over 20-something episodes.
Well, yeah, I can definitely see your point. I definitely see where you're coming from. But the thing with the Universal Translator in particular, like, that storyline I actually didn't have a problem with. I actually didn't want them to linger on it for too long. I thought it was kind of great, the introduction of it, so I didn't have an issue with it. But I would totally agree with you in regards to last night's episode with the time travel aspect thing with Pike and Tyler. In fact, I said the same thing. I thought it was a good concept, but they just didn't do anything with it. Like, they just popped it up in there and it showed up, and they just didn't do much with it. Although I did compare it to an Next Generation episode in the first season, which I thought did the exact same thing. It felt very similar, reminded me of that too, where they introduced these time travel concept and didn't actually do anything with it.
Well, that's different though. I was thinking about that. The reason that episode is different is because the funky time mechanics show the crew in the TNG that there is a problem. Like the reason for the funky weirdness is to show and create this little mystery as to what is happening. And once you move into the real story of the episode, they get away from the time travel stuff. So it functions as an introduction and a hook to the audience. The time travel here doesn't do that. What they do is they lay this trap, which is something Discovery does a lot, which is Discovery loves to bait and switch. It's like the main thing that they do in their writing. And what they did here for the Light and Shadows was Pike sees himself in a vision shoot Tyler, right? And so he looks at it, he's like, oh, geez, like I'm going to shoot Tyler. He has this concerned look on his face. 10 minutes later, they show you that he just didn't have the right point of view, and he didn't see himself shooting the Dr. Octopus tentacle, and he wasn't shooting Tyler. But a better written show would have tied that story into the Pike and Tyler relationship on the shuttlecraft. Pike would be looking at Tyler saying, what's this asshole going to do? Because I'm going to shoot him in 10 minutes and I need to know why this is happening. Discovery doesn't do that. It's not interested. It thinks the concept alone is cool and the idea will carry the episode. And it's not interested in fleshing out, which even first season TNG was interested in fleshing out a story around the fact that they were like wandering into this time shenanigans.
Well, I would actually, from my opinion, I think that the time travel aspect of the last episode actually served a greater purpose than in the TNG episode, because even though it was like, oh, here's the problem of the week, it seemed like it could have been anything. It didn't have to be time travel. It could have been anything. Whereas I think this past episode is setting up, it ties into the greater storyline of the Red Angel being from the future, and it's setting up another element with the probe thingy, that looked like the Matrix Sentinels that attacked the shuttle. Like, it's setting up. So, I mean, maybe you don't like it because it's a mystery, but it is setting up sort of mysteries and introducing everything.
Here's the question for you: if that's the case, why not release all the episodes at once so that I can get the entire story? You're writing an episodic television show. You need the episode to stand on its own. If it's not doing that, you're failing at what you're trying to do. And if they don't have a hook to the episode, what's the point of watching? Why don't I just wait until these are all released and then I can figure out what's going on? I'm not watching this show. Television makes the mistake that they think a TV season is like a 15-hour movie. It's not. They are distinct chapters in a book. And if the chapter doesn't hold your attention, it's failed as an episode of TV. The whole reason that we split these things the way that we do is because you want a self-contained, well, you can still have an overarching serialized story. You want a self-contained, satisfying thing that is 45 minutes long. That's the point. And if you don't get that, you feel very let down. And it's like, well, this is all just building so that I get to the end of the season and I hope it all pans out. And like as a writer, you would be better off writing 15 independently sort of linked stories that you could say, well, 12 of these were pretty good. 3 of them were pretty terrible. But at least overall, people are going to remember the 12 that are good. Instead, what Discovery's doing is watch these 15 episodes, and we hope we stick the landing. And if we don't, you're going to say that was a terrible 15-episode stretch of TV.
Well, I think that's where you and I would differ, because I would actually say maybe last night's episode is not a good example because that wasn't a very good episode. But some other episodes early in the season, I think, do stand alone as much, and they do keep me satisfied within the episode itself as well as tying into the greater story. Like, I'm rewatching Lost at the moment, and I think it actually, arguably, I would argue it does it better than some episodes of Lost, which don't stand on their own at all. Some episodes, not all of them. So for me,
Lost also had 24 episodes in a season, right? So they have like double the amount of garbage that they have to put out.
Yeah, for the first 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. But but for me, for most episodes, not everyone, like last week, I probably wasn't completely satisfied with it. But most episodes, I would say, yeah, it is giving me enough in that week, as well as tying it to the greater storyline. I think episode 2 of the season is a very good example of that.
Of this season.
Yeah, of this season, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't know any show where every single episode, when we're talking about serialized shows here that are more serialized than episodic, where every single episode just stands out on its own. I actually have this expectation that certain episodes, okay, we're just setting up, especially the first episode usually of a season of Game of Thrones. It's standard procedure is we're kind of wrapping up the end of the previous season and we're starting to set things in motion for the rest of the season, but does it usually stand on its own as an episode? Not usually. And I accept that because that's part of the storytelling process, because I'm looking at it as a greater whole. And I that's kind of how I felt about this last episode. I didn't feel like it stood on its own at all, but I also kind of was okay with it because it's serving its function in the greater story. And now I do agree with Mark that I do think some of the episodes do stand on their own. If I felt like no episode was standing on its own, then I wouldn't be too into it either. But I do feel like that some of them do. Others of them I'm okay because I feel like they're serving their function in the overall story, and I feel that way about any show that I watch, not just Discovery.
I mean, I would. Chat seems. I wanted to clarify something too. Chat seems to be reacting to me saying that they seem to think that I don't want serialized story. That's not what I'm saying. My ideal Star Trek setup. Have you guys seen Mad Men?
I've watched like the first 4 seasons, I think.
Mad Men is what I would have wanted from a Star Trek series in terms of storytelling. Mad Men has arcs that go across the seasons, but each episode is like its own little short play. Like it takes a character moment and it kind of builds off of it, and it feels contained. There are no Mad Men episodes that you watch and you think, well, that is just linking to the next episode. Every Mad Men episode, while servicing this overarching story and the storylines that are going across everything, it still finds time to tell a story within its 45-minute runtime. It still is a contained, satisfying thing. And I just think that's a better way for Star Trek to approach it, because the concepts of how Star Trek works, which is that you have these sci-fi things and you have sort of character moments and you have ethical dilemmas and blah, 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 and all that nonsense. You can do that in an episode. It's very difficult to sustain that across 15 episodes. You can do it in a single episode. It's possible. You must try to do it. And this show doesn't. This show, and I think Chad kind of agreed with me, the first 2 episodes of the season succeeded at that. They weren't great episodes, but they were kind of like, oh, here's our mission of the week. In service of searching for Spock, we're going to actually go down to this planet, we're going to hang out, and we're going to do something. I thought New Eden is probably the best episode of this season because it accomplished that goal. And I think things like Point of Light, which is by far the worst episode of the season, are the opposite, where it's doing is trying to move the chess pieces around on the board. It's trying to be Game of Thrones, except it sucks at it. And the piece moving is so obvious that all you can focus on is how obvious the chessboard is at that point. And that's when the series is no good. And I think they skew too far to that direction a lot of the time.
Well, I just want to speak to your point about that perhaps a format of Mad Men would be better than the format of overall storytelling. But in the chat, Quack said that Deep Space Nine does that. And I would actually believe like the last 10 episodes of season 7, which I absolutely loved, like all those episodes were just feeding off of each other. I don't think any of them were particularly standalone. I thought it did a great job. And I would say the same thing about season 3 of Enterprise, which I loved, one of my favorite seasons of Star Trek, that was also very sort of feeding into the overall story. So I think Star Trek can do that. Is Discovery doing the best job at it? No, it's not. It needs improvement, but I think I do see some good there. I think there are some things it gets right, and I think as the show continues that they could get it better. And as again, like season 2, I mean, it could be horrible. The last 7 episodes could suck, but if it could be great if they get their shit together and sort of work through some of these kinks.
Do we all agree that Point of Light is the worst episode of the season? Is there any disagreement there?
Okay, remind me. I'm getting the titles mixed up in my head. Which one was that?
Point of Light is the Klingons with the Klingon decapitated baby. Ash
Oh
Tyler
yes,
Lee.
yes.
Oh yeah, that would be the worst one.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yes.
Okay.
That felt very much like a season 1 episode.
Because it was so relentlessly trying to move pieces.
Yes.
What it's trying to do is it's trying to, like, to me, the worst part of this season, I think, is Ash Tyler. And not just Ash Tyler as a character. It's the way that they were like, well, we screwed up this character in the first season, and now he's stuck with the Klingons. We need to get him back onto Discovery somehow. So what we'll do is we will have him pretend to be killed, and then we will have him just openly walk around on the ship of Discovery. He'll join Section 31 and be gung-ho and all about it. The moving of that character, because they need him to be back on Discovery, is so obvious and terrible that you spend the entire time watching these episodes going, is Ash Tyler going to do anything other than stand in the background of the bridge for these episodes? Like, why is he not doing anything? And I think another thing that we can maybe talk about is, the show gets compared to Game of Thrones, I think erroneously a lot of times. Game of Thrones is a much better TV show than this is. But the thing that what's interesting about Discovery is that it has a relentlessly fast pace, as if it has so much information it needs to convey to you. But at the same time, not a lot is going on this show. It's kind of interesting how little is actually happening, even though a lot of stuff is happening, is like coming at you. When you're not seeing a character on screen in this show, those characters aren't doing anything. There's no character who's doing anything in the background. They have to be on camera. Burnham has to be standing next to them, and then they'll tell you what's going on. But why doesn't the show, as a modern story, have a continuing thing going on? What happened to Culber? Why haven't we checked in with Culber over the past couple episodes? He's back. Stamets was concerned about him. Why don't they check in with a little scene to connect the dots a little bit and make you feel like this is like a cohesive thing going on? And instead, they're very content to just jump between scenes, and there's not a... Game of Thrones is very good at making you feel like even if you're not seeing people, stuff is moving. Pieces are moving in the background. Everyone is doing something that you're not aware of. Discovery doesn't do that. It's very myopic and it's very narrow focused. And I think that it's a problem with that focus and the incredible pace of it. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about like the stories that they could be balancing off of this.
Akton, do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, I was going to let you go first.
Oh, well, I would say I pretty much agree with you, Wes, for the most part. I think this is one of the downsides of the show is that they haven't completely worked out the pacing of the overall story. And I talked about this in my last review, is that if they did something like Game of Thrones where they have more of a multi-focus, it would be better. But I would say, like, we don't necessarily need to touch back in Culber in this episode, as long as the next time we see him, like, that is, like you said, stuff is going on in the background. It's not the exact same
But
thing.
that means that the only thing that drives characters to think about other characters is interacting with them. Stamets and Culber are lovers. Why is Stamets not constantly consumed by what has happened to his lover? It makes no sense that he doesn't think about this on a nonstop basis. And because he doesn't think about it, Stamets is in limbo this entire season. Stamets has almost nothing driving him at all going on here. He doesn't want to go back into the Spore network, and then he helps Tilly with her sort of Spore possession whenever that happens. But Stamets himself is not exploring anything that has happened to him, and it's problematic. It just leaves him in limbo, and you end up waiting for characters to pop up. The worst case of this is Jet Reno, I think that's her name, who seems only to be there as a guest casting, who pops up when her episode pops up, and then she comes in and fixes the problem. But she has no character outside of that. She just appears out of the ether.
I just really quick got to interject in the chat. Matthew Ross says Culber is doing mushroom thingies. Mushroomy things, yeah.
That guy's jacked though. He's in terrific shape. They should bring him back and take his shirt off just so he can walk around a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I don't know, but I was actually not. I was not a huge fan of them bringing Culber back to the show because I felt that was kind of a cheat for Stamets' character. I felt like that a part of what Stamets' journey was going to be in season 2 was getting over the fact that his lover had passed away, and now he was ready to leave the ship in the beginning. So I thought that that's what his season 2 arc was going to be, is just kind of this evolution of character. And also I assumed at some point that My Serial Network would cease to be, so that would be part of his evolution. So I almost found it kind of a cheat that they brought him back to life, because I thought that it was much more interesting for his character if his lover was dead, and now it's like, oh, he's back now. But it does look like that they are trying to make it interesting in a different way, because now they're going to have to deal with what Culber's back, but he's clearly not himself. Something has changed. So I guess that's what they're doing now. And this is probably, I guess would be if I were to pick one thing that I liked least about Discovery, especially in season 2, is I feel like they don't know what they want to do yet with with a lot of the stories. That I feel like things are changing. And with Saru's story, I was outraged when they did that short and completely changed the storyline from season 1, and they try to kind of fudge it over and go, oh well, they use the terms predator and prey in that last episode to try to make it linked to season 1, but this is clearly not what they had in mind in season 1 at all. The Baul were not in their mind in season 1. So I feel like, and then Ash Tyler is probably the biggest problem. They don't know what to do with that character. So I think, I'm obviously overall much more positive on the show, but that would probably be the one thing that I find most problematic, is that they don't really know what to do with a lot of these characters yet. They're still trying to figure it out, and they're changing things a lot, and I'm just hoping that gets smoothed over. And I'm hoping that I'll be open-minded about the bringing Kobar back, and that will be interesting in its own way, but to me it felt like a little bit of a right turn, just a sharp right turn, because I thought we were experiencing a journey of Stamets trying to move past.
The Culber's thing is interesting because what I thought they were trying to do with the Spore Network was make it an allegory for heaven. I thought that they were saying it's an afterlife. It's a version of this is where like dead people go and you can kind of talk to them. And that would have tied into this whole thing that they've got this second season, which is faith versus reason. And I thought that the Spore Network was going to be the faith argument there, whereas their science couldn't really explain what was going on. And you'd have scenes where you could have lovers who like maybe never say goodbye to you. Culber can't come back with him. It's about grief. It's about moving on. It's about all these things that are maybe, human emotions. Maybe we can involve some humanity into the story. And they don't do that. And as you're saying, they just brought Culber back. And now we had this weird scene with him in sickbay where he's like, I feel funny. I don't feel like myself. And so you go like, all right, well, Jesus, it's another mystery that we've got to figure out what's going on. Why can't they just be open with me and tell me what's wrong with him? Why do they have to like just lead me along with this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't, I don't know. Like the Colbert thing I think it was definitely a sharp turn from it. Was definitely not. I think it's definitely a sign of different showrunners taking over, go in a different direction and doing a different thing. Because I think it's totally inconsistent with season 1. As you're right, that's really not how they presented it. But as I said, so I'm not thrilled with it, but if they do something interesting with it, I'll be open to it. Now, I actually bringing out this sort of a faith versus reason argument, I just made me realize that they kind of got away from that theme in the past couple episodes, which kind of
they don't stick with any theme. They don't stick with anything.
I hope that they get back to that theme, but yeah, it seems like
that seems like a theme that the first 3 episodes seemed to imply this was going to be a big thing. It seemed like Pike was a kind of if not religious, he was like a spiritual character who didn't always take Burnham's cold hard logic at face value, which would pair nicely with the fact that he's also Spock's friend or commanding officer or whatever. And they've kind of moved away from it. They have these awkward opening monologue, captain log things that kind of vaguely hint at it, but they're kind of just nonsense. And they feel like they're trying to be faux poetic, and they just come across as really sloppy writing. And I wish they would go back to a more decent examination of what this means for faith versus reason. And I think that can only help to strengthen Burnham's character, who I think is a pretty terrible main character at this point, because she is so ill-defined by what it means to be a human raised on Vulcan. Is ostensibly that's her point. Like that's what the character is supposed to be saying, that what does it mean to be a human who has to be repressing your emotions? Why does Burnham cry every episode? Why is she the worst Vulcan that we've ever seen? And wouldn't it make more sense for this character to be the stoic, cold, unable to be opened up to anybody character, which is what the emotional damage of being a human raised on Vulcan would do to you, I would imagine.
Well, first of all, I want to touch on the monologues things, because that's something I've heard a lot of people complain about. Colonel Doomsday brought it up earlier, how he hates them, and I agree. I don't like them either. But what it reminds me a lot of, it reminds me of The Walking Dead, which I can't even watch that show anymore. I mean, for a while, I was hate watching it. I was forcing myself to watch it even though I didn't want to. So that's a show, like, I would definitely choose to watch Discovery over that. But it reminded me of that, and because they always do these like poetic, voiceover monologues things if they would try to appear all artsy, and it seems like that's what Discovery is doing too. It seems very similar to The Walking Dead, and that's something I hated about The Walking Dead, and that's something I definitely don't like about what Discovery is doing with the trying to be all artsy. Oh, look at us, aren't we artsy? We have these cool poetic monologues, and I wish they'd just knock it off. I think it doesn't help anything.
The thing that's so great about the Captain's Log in Star Trek is that it's a great way to show the audience what they're going to deal with for the next 45 minutes. Like when on the original series or TNG or DS9, the Captain's Log would be like, we're at this planet, we got to meet this guy, he's going to do this, this is the problem. So in a weird sci-fi show where you can kind of be confused about what the hell is going on, and with all the technology and technobabble, the Captain's Log serves to ground you and let you know what you are going to expect for this episode. Discovery muddies the water by making it so nonsensical and so poetic and sort of disconnected from what the story is that you feel like you're paying attention to a theme that doesn't exist. You're like, well, they must be trying to talk about this. Oh, wait a minute. Like, I think the most recent one was, my mother told me that the mysteries always come in three: birth, life, death, past, future, present, future. That's where the Red Angel is from. It's like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Why were you talking about birth and death, and then you segued into the Red Angel? They need to get back to the Captain's Log or the opening monologue explaining what the episode is about. I think that's just a solid, good idea, and it's something that really has served Star Trek well over the past couple decades.
Yeah, I would just assume they just knock it off entirely with the monologues. It has served Star Trek well in the past, the Captain's Log, but I've watched plenty of other shows that there's no Captain's Log, where The Expanse is an example if we want to get in the realm of sci-fi. BSG, they don't need to tell you what's going to happen. I think the audience is smart enough now that I think the Captain's Log I don't feel like I would need a Captain's Log. If they did it, fine, but I would just assume they don't do any monologues at all. I definitely agree. We had Saru did one, usually it's Burnham. I honestly find myself not really paying attention to them, if I'm being totally honest, because I don't think that they do serve a really strong purpose of the show. Not that we need to have any monologue that serves a purpose. I think we could do without them entirely, and I would be totally happy with it.
Again, just something in the chat real quick for those Babylon 5 fans. Alexandra says that Kosh is the Red Angel. There we go. There's our answer. But anyway, also another thing interesting in the chat is that Matthew said the problem is they don't lead the show from the captain's chair, and Colonel Doomsday agreed with that. I actually would disagree with that. I'm actually glad that it's not a typical captain sitting in the captain's chair leading the show. That's something I liked about Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine didn't do that at all. Although that might have been a bit more permissible since it was a space station, but I do like how they switched up a bit. So I actually see that as a bit of a positive.
I mean, I think the best thing Discovery, the best idea they've had is changing the captain every season. I think that's like a terrific way to shake up what you're doing, and I think that Pike is by far the best part of this show at this point. And it's not even down to writing. It's just the performance of Anson Mount, who has brought a likability that none of the other characters really have into it. And you understand why he's in this position of leadership, and he seems fair, and he seems like a traditional Star Trek captain, which is nice to pair with the modernity of Discovery. Like if the other character is going to be so different from that traditional Star Trek mold, then Pike being a new center for them, I think, is a good idea. And I like that they've changed the captain chair this season, especially because Lorca is probably the worst goddamn captain that we've ever seen in Star Trek. But that's
really. Yeah. I don't know if I'd say that. But.
Yeah.
Who's worse than Lorca?
Oh, who's main captain, or
main captain.
Main captain is Archer.
Oh, interesting.
didn't like Archer.
I will second that. No, I do like what they're doing with. I didn't want. Again, I keep saying this. I didn't want them to do the same thing that we've been watching for 50 years. If I wanted to watch that, I will watch the reruns. And this is kind of why I am. I will rant and rave about the Orville, because if it's a comedy, it's fine. But when people start taking it as seriously as a sci-fi show, I'm like, if I wanted to watch that, I would just watch reruns of The Next Generation. They're way better. That's that's how I feel about. That's when I heard they're doing a new Star Trek show. I didn't want them to do the same thing, because if I wanted to watch that, I'll just watch the reruns. It's time to move forward. It's time to do something different. And I like that Discovery takes a lot of risks. I do feel that a lot of these risks are not paying off, but I like that they're trying. And I'm still, maybe I'm naive, but I'm just having faith that these risks will start paying off. And one of my favorite things that Discovery did was making the main character not be the captain. And then you do have different captains every season. And I liked Lorca. I liked the fact that we had a different kind of captain. We had like the asshole captain be the main character. Now it's debatable whether we needed to make him mirror universe. I don't think I hated that reveal as much as Mark did, but I kind of think the show would have been better had he just been an asshole captain who was from for the Prime universe rather than a mirror universe captain. But I actually liked that they went that direction. They're doing something different. I think when you do something different from what we've been watching for the last 50 years, I think it's going to get a lot of negative reaction. I think there's going to be a lot of people who they want to see the same thing that they've been seeing for 50 years. And when they see something different, they're going to react negatively to it. I want to see something different. And for better or worse, I think some of the things that they've done differently has not paid off. But I want the same thing of the new Picard show. I don't want Next Generation Part 2. I want something different. So Discovery is doing what I wanted it to do. It's just not always as successful as I would like it to be. And sometimes it is.
Yeah, and I think that season 2 is pretty much, well, maybe not entirely, but pretty much fixed the tone issues. I think season 1 had a lot of tone issues. I wasn't really sure what the overall tone or theme should be, and I think that had a lot to do with all the behind the scenes issues, and I'm liking it much better in season 2, although that episode 3 Point of Light, that was a drawback, step backwards. But other than that, I think for the most part they are finding a tone that's a lot more in keeping with what you would think of Star Trek.
Yeah, I think that the show, I'm just trying to think about like what the show could really do to sort of hook itself for me, and I think it really just comes down to the writing. I mean, I guess I would say that the changes that the way that I viewed how they would update Star Trek would be to add a more modern storytelling aspect to it, which they kind of have through this like serialized nature. They would update all the effects, and they would there are certain things that I think are important to the franchise that you don't get rid of. Like, I view the captain's log as kind of important to it, and especially in a series that's as breakneck pace as this one, I do think it's necessary to have like a catch up at the start of every episode to explain what's going on. And I think that the things that the show thinks are good Star Trek items are these sort of fan servicey things that I don't really like. Here's a question for you. If you were not a Star Trek fan, would anything that happens in any of these episodes or any of these seasons really get you? Like the Talos 4 thing at the end of this episode, the last episode, is a great example. Like, if you don't know what Talos 4 is, or like say you had never heard of Spock, say you didn't know who Spock was, what is Burnham's story here? She's searching for her brother? Who cares? Why do I care about her brother? The only reason that people care about these characters is because it's Spock. It has a name brand recognition to it. And if the show was a totally non-branded Star Trek show that was written exactly the same way, I think people would be much more negative to it. You have this sort of built-in bias towards it because you know these names and you know these things. And I would be really interested to see what someone who knew nothing about Star Trek thought of the show, because I think none of it would make sense to them. They'd be like, why are all these unimportant things happening right now?
I have watched a few podcasts with people who have known nothing about Star Trek, and I actually think for the couple ones I saw, again, this is just anecdotal evidence, they actually tend to like the show more than a lot of people who are used to seeing Star Trek a certain way. they follow Star Trek. They follow the show just on its own. They don't think it's the best, but they enjoy it because they don't have that mindset of what Star Trek should be like.
But I mean, I sort of disagree with the. I'll let you go after. I sort of disagree with the people who complain about canon changes. I don't understand. I don't really care about canon. Like
Yeah.
I sort of consider canon like the Supreme Court justice said about pornography. It's like I don't really, I can't define it, but I only care. You know, I know what it is when I see it, and like I feel that way about canon a little bit. It's like I don't really care, but like if there's an egregious change to it, I kind of care, but not really. Like you can fudge a lot of it, and I don't really care about it. And I think that there's a subset of people who complain about the show that only seem to care about canon, and I think that those complaints are kind of irrelevant. Like it doesn't matter to me. The story is the problem.
I mean, well, that's why I enjoy watching your podcast and value your opinion, even though you look on the show a bit more negatively. I know that you're judging it on its own merits and not just being like, oh, canon this.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that from the beginning, I have not wanted them to. I've been waiting for them to be able to stand up on their own. I guess they feel like because they have the name Star Trek in it, they need to depend on these previous characters. Mark and I used to talk about a lot last year that we wish that Burnham's stepfather was just some other Vulcan, like not Sarek. Why does it have to be Sarek? Why does this have to be Pike? Can't this be a really cool captain character that's not Pike that maybe would be able to come back next year? Because we know Pike can't come back next year because he's got to go back to the Enterprise. So, and to answer your question, if it wasn't Spock, if it was a different brother, they would have to make it more interesting than what it is. They are over relying on just a Spock.
That's my
and
point.
That's why that's the only way anybody. Only reason anybody cares. I would have preferred it if it wasn't Spock, if it was a different brother, but then they would have to find other ways. They would be if they presented it, if they kept it the way it is, and it wasn't Spock, nobody would care. But maybe the challenge to at that point, okay, now we have to find ways to make this interesting. Why do people care about Michael Burnham's brother now if it's not Spock? I kind of
the writers have to do their job and come up with like interesting.
I feel like I want them to just get this all out of their system now. That's why I'm like, Towels 4, sure, whatever. You want to throw Kirk in there, Sulu? I don't care. Throw everybody in there. Get it out of your system in season 2. Let's get past this and learn how to write a show on your own, like without depending on previous, Star Trek characters. And I don't know if they thought that was going to be a draw for people. But I tend to hear more negative reaction to it than positive. I don't hear a lot of people like, "Oh, I'm so glad they have Spock in this." Or,
I think,
I'm
you can only screw it up. There's only downside to doing this much canon involvement. It's like just ignore it. I mean, the whole problem is that the show shouldn't have been a prequel in the first place. The show should have been set after Nemesis.
I absolutely agree with that. I did not want a prequel at all. I was very upset when I found out it was going to be another prequel rather than forward in time. I wanted this to be, I think it was like, what was it, 60 to 80 years between the original series and the 60 years? I can't remember.
100 years between the original series to Next Generation.
TNG.
Yeah, it was 80 TNG. Years from the TNG, from the original series movies to TNG.
That's what I'm thinking. 80 years from the movies to TNG.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking, like another 80 years would be good. I wanted something new and different, because if you're setting it in the future of all the previous movies and series, then what you can do is wide open. You're kind of restricting yourself if you're setting it in the past. So of course they're going to break canon. Like, how are you not going to break canon? It's hard not to. If you're trying to do something new and then everybody's complaining, well, everything looks a lot more futuristic. Well, of course it does. It's being made in 2017 through 18 and not 1967. I'm actually doing a rewatch currently of the original series, which I have not done in years. I have actually never watched the episodes in order, and I'm doing it now. And our technology is far surpassed this technology that's supposedly in the 23rd century now. So yes, when you're going to do a Star Trek show, it's going to look a lot more futuristic. And yes, that you have to have a lot of suspension of disbelief if it is taking place before this 1960s show. So I wish they had never done a prequel either. I really wanted them to do it forward in time. That's why I'm really excited about the Picard show, because we do have a chance to go forward in time, albeit we are focusing on a previous character. I still want the show where it's all different, all new, different characters, different ships in the future, which I don't know if we're getting that. But since Discovery is what it is, I mean, I've accepted it. It's in the past. They're relying on these previous characters. I'm waiting for them to break out of that mold. I'm waiting for them to be able to be its own show. And they made it more difficult for themselves by setting it as a prequel. They've really restrained themselves by putting it in this time period, because there's only so much you can do with something that happened before the original series.
Actually, I had always wanted a show, like in the 90s or whatever, in the early 2000s. I kind of wanted a show set in the original series timeline, because we had gotten so much Next Generation timeline. I was like, oh, I want to know more about this time period. I don't think we'd exploded enough. And I do think there's a way that they could have done it and not sort of so the technology, there's no way of getting around it. Like you said, Apkin, it's 2018. They have to look different. But other than that, I think there's ways they could have done it that wouldn't have sort of stepped on the original or relied on it as a crutch. Like, it was a completely independent ship. He didn't have any, Michael Burnham had nothing to do with Sarek, nothing to do with Spock, nothing to do with Pike. It's just some other ship, and they just barely mentioned the Enterprise. I think they could have done it better. But I think the issue is, and as you were saying about most people being repelled by the mentioned the inclusion of Spock, I think a lot of the casual general audience, who is probably who they're aiming is towards a lot, are probably attracted. Oh, Spock! I know who that is, and they watch the show. And I think that's what. And I think one of the main issues I think with Discovery is that it's how much money they throw into it. I mean, it's beautiful. It is such great special effects. Everyone agrees it's like the best aspect of it. But the problem,
looks good.
But the problem with throwing so much money into something like Star Trek has typically always had small budgets. Like, through all the incarnations, they've never been a big budget show because it's such a niche show. And the problem is they're treating it like a mainstream, mainly because of the Abram movies, and that's why they wanted. That's why it looks so similar. That's why it's set in a similar time period. Is because they're playing off of that and wanting to make more money. And so the issue is having such big budgets, they have to try to appeal to bigger main audiences instead of their niche, which is, to me, in my opinion, always the fallback, always the negative side of the Star Trek franchise. When Voyager, Enterprise tried too hard to appeal to main audiences instead of their niche audience, that's when the show failed. And I think that's also Discovery's biggest failing. It's because I think it would be better if they just cut back on this budget, and so they wouldn't be so dependent on making sure they get all the hits.
Yeah, when you're trying to appeal too much to the mass audience, what you get is, it's been a long road. Get from there to here. Like, just stop trying to appeal to the masses. Stop trying to be popular. Satisfy your fans. I mean, I don't know how many shows there needs to be before they learn this. Like, satisfy your base, your fans. Like, stop trying to appeal to mass audiences with crappy theme songs and whatever else you need to do. And that's been an issue with Trek ever since Voyager, really.
I guess I'd kind of disagree. I think that Discovery is severely aimed at Star Trek fans. It is so referential to Star Trek that like a modest or a lesser fan, like my co-host partner Clay, is familiar with Star Trek, but he did not get the Talos reference. He knew that it was something, but he didn't get it, and like he didn't know specifically what that was at the end of the episode. And I think that their problem is that Star Trek, in its attempt to appease fans, it makes the material difficult to get into. because they're trying so hard to reference previous Star Trek and to like tie up canon loose ends and everything that I think the way that you generate a modern mainstream audience is that you just tell good stories. Like, it seems kind of redundant and silly. This is my only point, but the show itself seems overly concerned with what people think about it. It seems like they course correct because of what fans think. The view screen thing is the most laughable example here, where Pike says, "Take out all the hologram emitters" or whatever. It's like, who cares? Just leave them in. Who cares?
Yeah.
And I don't care about that stuff. The problem with it is that if you're going to make these technological changes, I completely understand this is a modern 2019 show. We can see these new kind of technologies, and I don't really care that it doesn't fit into canon, quote unquote. But don't draw my attention to it. Don't draw the audience's attention to this is ridiculous that we have to do this, and that Pike apparently tearing out all the hologram emitters has caused the rest of the fleet to tear out their hologram emitters. And I just feel that in trying to appease hardcore Star Trek fans who are never going to be happy about anything, they're miserable people. Like, they're never going to like what Star Trek has done. Just go for telling a good story, ignore all the canon. And I think that Fuller's original idea of an anthology series would have made a lot more sense. You could do a small story as an anthology in this time period, and it wouldn't affect canon that much. You could have done that. The problem is that they're sticking with it, and they have technology like the Spore Drive, which doesn't make any sense, and they have things like it's just stuff that you have to explain away. And I think that it's a waste of writing room brain power to have to think about ways to come up with solutions to get rid of these problems that you shouldn't have had in the first place.
Well, I would totally agree with you that the way to attract main audiences, more audiences, by telling a good story. But unfortunately, this is something not just Star Trek, outside of Star Trek, a lot of Hollywood studios, a lot of other studios do not get. Dark Universe is a good example. The DC Extended Universe is another good example. They try copying formats and try playing to, like, oh, here's the name recognition or whatever, instead of just tell a good story first. So I do think that the writers, it's the same thing with Discovery, is that they don't get that either. Is that they're trying to hear Spock, come watch the show. That's what's going to attract people, because we're having all these name drops to Spock. Whereas if you would tell the story first, that would be the better way to attract main audiences, and then worry about all this sort of. That's why every time they do, like, and this happened more in season one, to be fair, is whenever they do those references or like name drop something, it always irritates me. I always point it out in my view. It always bothers me. And to get back to the point about like relying on Spock and Pike and whatever, they're using it as a crutch, because it's, as you said, it's like instead of telling good stories, instead of having, if you had original characters, they would have to work harder. They're using it as a crutch, and this is something I've heard someone recently blaming Alex Kurtzman doing a lot, using crutches and easy get-bys. Like, I would say the DCEU and the Dark Universe do this as well, instead of having to first tell good stories. But again, this is something I hope they're moving past. But the thing with Pike is, I think they have made him original good character. Like, you don't need the name recognition of Pike for him to be a good character, for him to work for the show. He's played by a good actor. He works well with the established character dynamic of the crew, so that's a success.
Well, you also don't really know anything about Pike, outside of, like, Pike appeared in a couple episodes, and you know that he gets crippled at some point. Like, that's basically all you know about Pike.
Yeah.
So Pike, to me, is the perfect Discovery character to bring in, because you don't really know anything about him. You can flesh him out, and he has very little canon impact. Like, he as long as you don't screw up the one thing that he's famous for, you will be fine with doing whatever you want with Pike.
Well, the thing with Pike, and after rewatching the Cage, and I think after you rewatched this recently as well, is that the Pike that appears in the Cage is totally different in character and in manners than this is a totally different character. But I'm completely fine with that. It doesn't bother me, because he's a good character and because he works with the show. So I don't mind that it's inconsistent with established characters, as long as it works for the show.
Yeah, and actually, rewatching the Cage, I don't know that I would like it as much if they did have that version of Pike in Discovery. He is very. I mean, he's a much more, I don't know what to say, aggressive,
stoic.
Yeah, stoic. I like.
Well, he's like suicidal in the Cage, which is interesting. Yeah. He's like a suicidal drunk.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's also like going through a rough period of his life because he's like, remember he's talking to that doctor and he's like, oh, I don't know if I can be a captain anymore because there was some traumatic event that had just happened and people had died. And so that's the explanation. He was going through a rough period. Now he's past it. So, but I don't. I would have been fine, honestly, if they didn't call it Pike and it was a different dude. But I'm also okay with them. Initially, when I heard it was Pike, my reaction was the same as what Wes just said, is that, well, we've only seen Pike really in one episode because the menagerie is all there is them watching the cage. I mean, there's nothing new in it. He's really only been in one episode, unless you want to count the scenes with him in that little black box. But other than that, with the little lights that turn, blink for yes, but which we have better technology than that. But he's really only been in one episode for all intents and purposes. So there was a lot of room to explore that character. But at the same time, now seeing that it is a completely different character, why does it have to be called Pike? I mean, I would have been okay if this was a different dude. But I'm okay either way. I'm also okay with it being Pike. But I also wonder why they have to rely so much on the old.
Yeah, they're just using it as a crutch. Yeah, they're just using it as a crutch for being lazy and trying to attract more audiences. Like for me, the bigger issue is Sarek. For me, that's even bigger than Spock. It's well, that kind of goes long because if you don't have Sarek, you have another Vulcan who fostered Michael Burnham. You don't need Spock. So it's just like, to me, I thought season 1 and probably this next season as well would have been much better if it was just some random Vulcan new character rather than Sarek.
Sirach.
Yeah, was that the name of the
Jake Sisko
figure? Oh,
Sirach Lofton.
Right. Sirach Lofton. All right.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I kind of have to run, so I'll just give my final thoughts about it. But it's really, Discovery could save the day here with its final 7 episodes. I think that's highly unlikely. I think Discovery has shown us the show that it is, and I think that the people who like it are going to like what it kind of delivers. And I think that the last episode they did is kind of what Discovery does. It's going to be a breakneck paced show with sort of weird decisions that don't make a lot of sense and a lot of bizarre character work and sort of like technological concepts that maybe don't make a whole lot of sense. But at the end of the day, if it wasn't Star Trek, I don't know if I'd still be watching this show. I think that it hasn't done enough to really grab me. I don't care about the central mysteries all that much. I think that the weakest part of the series is actually the continuing storylines that they do, which is the Spore Network and the Red Angel and everything. And I don't know. I think that I have bigger hopes for the Picard show and stuff like that, I think. But we'll see when we get there.
Yeah, fair enough. And to answer your question, well, at least for season 2, for me, I think the biggest, and I think I said this in my last review, the biggest negative drawback for me is Section 31. I think the season would be so much better if they just excluded them entirely, including Ash Tyler. Just get rid of that whole thing. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it really adds anything to it. And I'm so not looking forward to the Section 31 spinoff. It's very negative to me. I might trash that show. I don't know. We'll see. I'll be open-minded. I'll come in with an open mind. But I am really looking forward to the Picard show. And a lot of people assume it's going to suck because Alex Kurtzman's involved. But as you say, I think he's just like the overhead guy. He's not going to really be the one running things and making decisions. So I think it's definitely a really good concept, and I think that it does have the potential to be good.
Yeah, from what I've heard about the Picard show, well, first we heard the announcement that there was a Picard show, and then I said, this is what I would like them to do with the Picard show. And then I heard more details of it, and it was basically what I was saying I would like them to do with the Picard show. That is not going to be, Picard is not in Starfleet anymore. It's going to be not about a captain on a starship. It's not going to be about even an admiral on sitting in a starbase or whatever. It's going to be a completely different type of thing. And that's the baseline of where I wanted them to start with it. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Now, as far as Section 31, I'm not as down on it as you are, but I also am not in love with it either. I think I'm higher on the Mira Giorgio character than you are. I do think that she's a little. I do think she's more interesting than you do. But I do also think that they could have had her in the show without Section 31, found a different way to incorporate her. I hate Ash Tyler in Section 31. I think that's probably my biggest complaint about the existence of Section 31. But if they're going to do a spinoff, I would rather them try to find a way to get Ash Tyler fitting back on Discovery again, which they have not done yet, to make it feel like he belongs there again, than to have him on this Section 31 spinoff. I don't want to see him on that show. And I will approach that show with an open mind as well and see and see what they do with it. Now, as far as are there any other spinoffs have been confirmed? There's
a cartoon done by
series?
by the creators of Rick and Morty, or someone who was involved in Rick and Morty, doing an animated series of the comedy about like it's called Lower Decks, I think, about people who take the green discs out of the replicators or something.
Okay. When is that going to be set? Do you know?
I don't know. I think it's the original series timeline.
So it's going to be a comedy.
Yeah.
Did they confirm that there's going to be the Starfleet Academy one? Because that was the one I was least hip on.
I don't think they've confirmed that one yet. It's still in development.
That's the one that I absolutely do not want to see. I may not even watch if they do.
I think that's going to be the aimed at teenagers one, the Dawson's Creek Star Trek show.
Which is absolutely not at all what I want to see. But the Star Trek franchise, for better or worse, is back, and they are really doing it up. And I think we're just going to see more and more stuff. So
I do have to interrupt, guys, and I do have to take off at this point. The babies are crying. I can hear them. Right. I appreciate hanging out. I appreciate talking with you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. It's a very good discussion, a lot of fun. Hopefully you can do this again sometime. Thanks a lot for joining
absolutely.
us.
Guys, thank you very much. Have a good night. Thank you for listening, everybody, too. See ya.
Cool. So do you want to go on for a bit longer, Apkin?
Yeah, is there anything else that you would like to cover?
I think so.
Because we've been kind of more talking about Discovery in general and what the issues are.
We did cover a lot about some of the specifics, though. But I think the one thing I want to cover is what I have it written in my notes as Spock teasing. Spock teasing, I guess you could call it Spock blocking as well.
Spock blocking.
The whole thing about, did we really need the build up to Spock coming in, and was it frustrating waiting week to week about here's Spock, we're trying to find Spock, oh no, that's not Spock, and we finally catch him. It's kind of incidental. It's kind of, they didn't even make a big deal. I was like, oh yeah, he's on Vulcan, there he is. And it seems to me, for me personally, before the season started, I heard or read somewhere that he wouldn't be appearing until the end of the season. So I didn't expect to see him early on, so I was wasn't too disappointed. But I was wondering, from the very first episode of the season, why are we teasing him already? And then the other episodes, it's I know we're not going to see him, so why you keep teasing as if we are? It's kind of I wonder if they were doing that as a gimmick to try to draw people in and be oh, is Spock going to appear this week? So what did you think of that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they overdid the Spock thing. I didn't think that we would ever see him until at least the second half of the season as well. So the whole misdirection with the shuttlecraft and really Giorgio was on it. Why did they do that? I don't know, because everybody knew that was Giorgio, especially if you saw the preview. In the preview, Spock wasn't in it, but Giorgio was. So, I mean, that was kind of the dead giveaway. So why do they... Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think they probably are. It was kind of a gimmick. They're ooh, will Spock appear this week? Even though everybody knows he's not. So I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not overall super bothered by that. It didn't ruin the show for me. but I do think that it was unnecessary.
Matthew Ross says he may not even appear yet. He may be shuttled off somewhere. Spock, I think he's in the preview for the next episode. So
no, Spock is there. I'm pretty sure he's here to stay. I don't think he's a. I mean, they're going to Talos 4 now with Spock, so he's there.
Yeah. Hopefully he's not going to stay behind on Talos 4.
Well, that would be a little.
Come back to him later on. Oh yeah, let's pick up Spock. But I don't know. Since my last review, I've sort of come around to being a bit more excited about the Telosians, about them, because this is my first reaction whenever we get any reference to any of the original track is but I think it might be a bit different because I think it would be interesting to touch on some of these aliens that are already established and get sort of. I'm really interested to see what Discovery's take on the Telosians will be and what role they have to play in Discovery. So. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I don't know, Mark. I saw them in the preview and they look totally different, so I don't think they're canon. I think it's a different universe. They don't look
it's a
exactly
different timeline.
Yeah, it's a different timeline because they look different. I am anxious to see what they do with the Telosians. I could see it going poorly, or I can see it going really well. I think actually I mentioned this in my review. I think there's one thing they could do that would be the best thing to do, but they're not. I don't think it's likely that they're going to do it, which would be to actually fix the menagerie, because it made no sense why Spock was behaving the way he was in the menagerie. But if he had gone to Talos 4 in between the cage and the menagerie, there could be a link there. I think that would be pretty cool to go back and fix an issue from the original series. I don't think they're going to do that. I think the best case scenario is that they don't overdo the and they don't do the. I don't want to see the Telosians just for the sake of the. Oh, look, here's the Telosians. Isn't that cool? I don't want that, and I think there's a chance that could be all this is, and I'm hoping that's not the case, because that's not what I want to see. So I'm interested in seeing where they go with this. So I actually am really kind of excited to see where they go with this. I want to see.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of cool if they did address some of the issues with the menagerie. Although we differed greatly on that episode, I actually really like that that two-parter. But I do get your points there, but I don't think it's necessary. If they didn't touch on that at all, and instead they tied them into the Red Angel storyline, as long as they did that and made them relevant, and not just look, the Telosians, then I think it would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. If they tied him into the Red Angel storyline too, it made that make sense. As long as it's not just look, delusion, as long as it's not just that, then I'll be okay with it. So, but I'm afraid that it is going to be just that. So, I suppose we shall wait and see.
Yeah. And the other thing, I guess we can get a bit more into Giorgio and Section 31, because I think. You addressed in the last review how I mentioned Giorgio was a mustache-twirling villain and how you disagreed with that. I'm not sure if I'd still say she was a mustache-twirling villain. I think you do have some points that they are making her a bit dynamic and sort of gray area, I would say, ins and outs. But I'm still not really digging her character. Maybe because it's tied into Section 31, who I'm really not on board with. Not just because canon violations, but it's like we say, it's like the comparison to Pike, because as I said, Pike's nothing like the original Pike, but I'm okay with that because they did something good with it. Section 31's nothing like the established Section 31, but they're not doing anything good with it. They're making them worse, and that's what bothers me, is that they come off as goofy, leather wearing dudes, and especially Tyler, anyway. You said you didn't hate Section 31 as much as I did, so what are your thoughts on them, man?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love Section 31 either. I just don't actively despise them the way that you do. And I'm just kind of ambivalent about them. I'm just going to, okay, they are what they are. They're moving the story forward, whatever. I at the same time, I would be totally okay if they were. I want Giorgio back. I like that they brought her back. I am interested in that character. I would have been totally fine if they found a different way to bring her in that had nothing to do with Section 31. So Section 31 is not a necessity for me, but I don't hate their presence. My biggest issue with Section 31 is Ash Tyler, that he makes no sense there, that they just were like, hey, you want to join Section 31? Sure. Like, it made no sense that they offered him the job. It made no sense that he accepted the job. He doesn't belong there. He's acting out of character. It's just, it's really stupid. Like, that is kind of my biggest issue with Section 31 is Ash Tyler's involvement.
Yeah, and he's acting like a big Section 31 guy. Like, oh, Section 31 wants this. And how the fuck do you know what Section 31 wants? You just joined them.
Yeah, and it's really, yeah, that was just really forced to me. I mean, it really felt like, they wanted to have Ash Tyler originally. Like, I feel like they wanted to explore this Klingon thing, and then they were like, oh, we can't do that. Like, we're at a dead end here. We don't know where to go with this. So let's just chop that off in one episode. Let's just sweep that under the rug. Forget we ever did that. Let's force them into Section 31. It's just not working. And you know what? If they had found a different way to bring Giorgio back other than Section 31, I would have been fine with it. I don't think Section 31 is a necessity for sure. I just don't, at this point, don't despise them the way that you do, but we'll just see how it goes. I'm reserving judgment on Section 31.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Tyler is I'm not that broken up that they got rid of his Klingon story arc, because I do think that is something they definitely set up for in season 1, but I do think the writers looked at it and says this isn't really working, so let's just scrap this. So I do, I don't really begrudge them for doing that. I just think they could have done a better job at tying up that storyline and getting rid of it. And plus, what they had, I like the idea of bringing Ash Tyler back in Discovery and the dynamic that they would bring. Like, the concept was, oh, I can't wait to see what they do with him. But what they did with him was crap. I think their execution, is an interesting concept, bringing him back into the fold. But the way they did it, as he's acting like, oh, Section 31, and just being like the Debbie Downer. And I didn't really buy the whole reconciliation between him and Pike in the last episode, by the way. So yeah, I think they could have handled Tyler much better.
Yeah. I don't. His whole presence on Discovery right now is problematic. So, but I'm hoping that they can merge that into something good, like that he can eventually transform into that story can transform into something better. So hopefully they're fixing the problem, but yeah, and then I didn't really buy their whole reconciliation either. I didn't really buy their whole. I mean, yeah, the whole thing with Tyler and Pike. I mean, it's the old. I mean, we've seen it many times before. Oh, these two characters don't get along, and now they're in a dangerous situation together, and they have to depend on each other. And now they're best buddies. Like, I mean, but on the other hand, that was kind of necessary to get past the fucked up storyline that they introduced in the first place. The bad storyline that they introduced in the first place was Tyler being adversarial towards Pike. They never should have done that in the first place. But since they did need to kind of fix that. So, I mean, I guess that's, though I don't buy it, I didn't love it, they needed to get past that stupid Tyler being adversarial thing. So I guess that's as good a way to do it as any. It's just like, I mean, there wasn't much they could do because it was problematic to begin with. So
yeah.
I just hope we can just look past that, move past this, and get to where Tyler maybe starts feeling like he belongs in Discovery again, maybe where he fits into the show again like he did in season 1.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you're right that it's as good as way as any, but yeah, it's kind of a failed storyline to begin with. Just wanted to point out in the chat, Colonel Doomsday said that we saw Giorgio eating an apple slowly. I didn't notice that. Because apparently it's that's the stereotypical cliche. Whenever someone's being an asshole or smug, they're always eating an apple. I don't know where that cliche comes from. It's such a weird cliche.
Yeah, and I even wrote it into my book. There's a bag.
Really?
And I didn't even think about it being a cliche. It's like it just seems like a thing to do. Like I don't know why, but it just seems like a thing that bad guys do is eat apples.
It's funny, but it's not only villains. Like sometimes, like Kirk did that in Star Trek too, but it was when he was being smug. And I think in the 2009, the young Kirk did that when he was cheating the Kobayashi Maru. So I think it shows that you're being smug and arrogant. That's so weird, though. Okay, so one more thing I wanted to talk about before we head off is, which I didn't think we got into enough. I wanted to dig in a bit deeper. Is the whole thing with Saru, because I actually forgot to mention this in my review of I think 2 weeks ago. Episode that dealt with this planet is because I know before the season you were very unhappy with the short, but am I correct in assuming that you've sort of come around and you're happy with what they ultimately did with the Baul and all that sort of thing?
Well, I came to a place of acceptance. It's like they've changed the storyline. Fine. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it now. They've changed it, so I'm just gonna roll with it. And I ultimately did like that episode. I did like what they ended up doing with that story. It's just just have to get over the fact that they went a different direction than what they had set up in season 1. They did their best to try to make it seem like it was the same as season 1 by using the terms prey and predator, even though they're completely that's not at all what they are. Yeah, I would say that I'm okay with it now because it is what it is. There's just no point in being upset about it forever. And that I liked what they ultimately did do with this new story that they created, which isn't the same as season 1, but they created this new story, and I ultimately liked the output of it in episode 6. So, yeah, I still would have preferred if they stuck to with what they started, but ultimately I'm okay with it.
No, yeah, I think it definitely works in terms of storytelling for that episode and Saru's overall character arc. But one like drawback I think and trepidation I have about it, and it's not that I didn't think it was believable or because I thought it was believable. I can buy it, but I'm not sure if it's good storytelling overall to have you introduce. It seems like what you were saying with Ash Tyler, like season 1 they introduced him as one thing, and then season 2 they're taking him somewhere totally different. And I think with Saru, like the fact they introduced him as prey, that was his characteristic, that was his species stereotype. Okay, we know that, we get used to it. Now all of a sudden he's a predator, and his whole species are predators now. Oh, they were predators the whole time, which I don't know. As I said, I don't have any aspects like I bought it, but not sure. I think it's too soon to do such a drastic character change. I was thinking it's kind of like if at the beginning of season 2 of Deep Space Nine they introduced found that the Odo's people were the changelings. Like that would have been too soon, and I think you needed to do it a bit later as the show, as we know the characters later. I think it's too soon to do such a drastic character change for Saru.
See, I don't see it as that drastic because I don't really see him as a predator. I just think that they have to use those terms so that they can seem like they're consistent.
I mean, he has those things that shot out of his head.
Yeah, but he's still, is he actively hunting anybody? I mean, he's not really a predator. He's just stronger. He's not a prey. He's a non-prey anymore.
Well, he's not a prey anymore. Yeah, before he was always like he's afraid, he can sense fear, but now his thing is about hunting, shooting things out of his head.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. It might be a little too soon to make that change. That maybe you should have developed him as a prey a little bit longer before you make that change. I mean, that's a valid point.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so if you like, we can just go ahead and end this discussion here. Very, very good discussion. Very much looking forward to the rest of the season. I think I was more so than Wes, but that's all good. So yeah, I do think it is, and I'll agree with Wes definitely one thing, that it is a sort of they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And I think, but to be fair, I think there's a lot of shows that do that. and not just Star Trek shows. There's a lot of serialized. I think that is a drawback of modern day serialized storytelling.
Well, that's exactly the point that I was making too. I feel like Lost did that. I feel like any serialized show I've ever watched does that. Like, I don't think that this is something that's unique to Discovery. I think just maybe he doesn't want to see that in a Star Trek show. But I mean, I feel like that every serialized show puts all their eggs in the basket. I feel like Game of Thrones puts all their eggs. If it doesn't end well, it's.
I still like the first 6 seasons.
Well, I still like the first 5 seasons of Lost, or 4.
Yeah. 4.5. Yeah. First 4.5
but there's definitely a lot of people who feel like the whole series was ruined.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't view it that way. But I do view that. Season 6 of Lost was a failure. If you look at it in season-wide arcs, that I feel like the Discovery could still be a success if season 2 is a failure, even. But I think that
for the season, I think it's really dependent on these last episodes how they hit the landing with the.
But I feel like. This seems to me to be something I talk about in any show that I watch. The Leftovers, in season 3, I was like, well, it's going to depend on how they stick this landing. The Expanse last year, it depends on how I feel like every show I watch almost, it depends on how they stick the landing. Like, so I don't feel that this is unique, just unique to Star Trek, but not unique to television shows that I personally watch.
Yeah, so I can picture a scenario where it's gonna be amazing. So, but I don't want to get my expectations up too high. Finally, do you have any theories about the Red Angel, or do you just want to avoid theorizing about what it could be? Because I think the best outcome for the Red Angel could be is that it's something that nobody theorized. That was the issue I had with season 1. Everyone knew Lorca was from the parallel universe. Everyone knew Ash Tyler was Vogue. So I think what they could do is that if the Red Angel is not any of these, like, it's something beyond theories.
I haven't heard a good theory for the Red Angel yet.
The one theory that I really like is the Iconians.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, but it doesn't fit to me. Like, I don't think that's what it is.
Yeah, because they were more in the past, not the future, unless they're revealed to be super time travelers. But I hope it's not like tied into the Soul Bond or the Temporal Cold War.
Yeah, I like the Iconian theory before they introduce the fact that they're from the future. Now I don't like it anymore. I don't think it fits. I don't. Yeah, and I don't want it to be the Suliban or Daniels or any of that stuff. In fact, just the fact that they're going into the future, it's almost like if it's not the Suliban and Daniels, it's almost like it's touching too close to that. So I think they're in dangerous territory here, where it could be too similar to that.
Yeah,
so I don't want to do something different. Absolutely, in no way, shape, or form do I want it to be future Michael Burnham or future Spock or future.
Yes. I might rage quit the show, or at least for a week, if that turns out to be the case.
Way, shape, or form do I want it to be any known character in the future.
Future Picard.
Future Picard.
Oh, God.
Or maybe it's future Pike after he's been living with the Flosian.
Right. God, that would suck.
So I don't want it to be any known character, any current character of the show. I think you're absolutely right that it would be best if it's something no one has thought of yet. And not only that, but something cool, not something no one's thought of yet that sucks.
And by the way, I'm starting to change my mind about what I said about the short trek Calypso and how I think will have nothing to do. I think it's sort of leaning. I think they are trying to tie it in. And I think if the Red Angel in the future tied into that somehow, and we've actually found out why Discovery was sitting there waiting, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, and I've always thought that it would. I always thought that it would tie into season 2, and I definitely now that they've introduced the concept of time travel, I think that it probably will. Now, the other 2 shorts, I don't think they need to tie in. Like, I don't think they. I mean, like, they could tie in the Tilly one if one of the red dots appears above that planet where that girl, that queen or whatever was from, but I don't want them to do that. We don't need to explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we don't need Harry Mudd. Like, those other 2 shorts, I'm okay with them not tying in at all. But
Yeah, as just in the chat, Colonel Doomsday says future guy from Enterprise, so that he's the Red Angel. But it's
future guy from Enterprise. Oh
remember?
yeah,
like the dark shadowy figure, and they never revealed who he was.
Yeah, they never.
I went and
I watched. What they're gonna do? They're gonna reveal who it is.
I watched the commentary for the first episode, and Rick Berman and Brennan Braga said that they didn't know who he was, that they had no plans for who he was. They were just doing it because it looked cool. But other people said that Brennan Braga said in other commentary that was supposed to be future Archer was supposed to be a future guy.
Oh, that would have been terrible. I'm glad that they did not reveal it at all. That do that.
Yeah, that would have been absolutely awful. Anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and end this discussion here. Thank you so much for joining. Also, again, thanks Wes for joining. That was such a great discussion. I love being challenged like that because it really makes me think and examine my position on the show. So, absolutely amazing discussion. But anyway, Akton, Wes left a bit early, so he wasn't able to do a shout out. If you haven't checked out his channel, it's called the Pensky File. It does podcasts on Discovery Weekly, and also he's running through every episode of Deep Space Nine at the moment, which I'm really enjoying. They're up to season 5, I think, so I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't already. But anyway, Akton, where can people find you, and what are you up to?
Yeah, you should check me out on Akton Tamko's channel. I am reviewing Discovery weekly. Also, in the realm of Star Trek, I have reviewed every single episode of Next Generation, one season at a time. So I have one video per season of Next Generation. So you should check those videos out. You can find those on my channel. And I am currently in the middle of doing the same thing for the original series, except I have split season 1 into 2 videos because I just have so much to say about each episode. I thought that it would be like 4 hours if I did it in one video. So part 1 is posted. It covers episodes 1 through 15. Please check it out. Part 2 is winding down. I'm almost got to finish, so it will probably be posted within the next couple days, or I'll do episode 16 through 29. So check all of that stuff out. Also, if you're into Game of Thrones, I have done a 3-part prediction videos on predictions for season 8. So you should also check those out as well. So just come find me. I'm at Akton Tamko's channel.
So Cardinal Doomsday says, are you writing book 2, I hope?
Oh, yeah. For those who don't know, I also have written a book called Daughter of the Sun, and you can link to it. At the end of each of my videos, I have a little 20-second little blurb on it. You can link to it. But as far as writing book 2, yes, I'm in the final. I'm having beta readers look over book 2 right now, and I'm in the early stages of book 3. So that's where I'm at with that.
Oh, really?
So book 2 should be out in the summer sometime. Maybe my goal was June. I don't know if I'll make June, but sometime in the summer, book 2 will be published, and I'm starting the early outline stages of book 3, and hope to have that out next year. So that's where I am with my books. Thank you for bringing that up, Cardinal Doomsday.
Cool. And if you're finding me for the first time, I'm Mark Minchinell's Enchantment of Eternity. I'm doing a similar format. I kind of copied off of Akton there, where I cover one season a month. I do one season of a Star Trek show, and I cover every episode one season at a time. I did this for Voyager, and I'm currently doing this for Deep Space Nine, where we release one video a week. In fact, I think in a couple days, I'm going to drop my season 6 video for Deep Space Nine, where I cover every episode of one of the best seasons of all Star Trek. It's a fake! Season 6 of Deep Space Nine. I had to do that. And yeah, so, and then a month later I'll do season 7. But other than that, I cover Discovery, and I'm going to focus more on my coverage of The Expanse for a little while, but I'm going to get back to more Star Trek stuff a bit later on. Anyway, thank you guys so much, everyone in the chat. Thank you for joining. Anyone watching this in the archives, thank you so much for sticking with us, and we will see you next time.